Many of us wanted to leave a solitary rose outside of Titan Tower that fateful day in the summer of 2008 when WWE decided it wanted to sanitize its programming of adult themes. Those maladjusted lads who came of age during the period of Hell in a Cell, Steve Austin's vehicular exploits, and sexually charged madness were confused. How in the hell were we supposed to enjoy clean wrestling? Of course, we all forgot that many of us became fans during a rather clean and safe period, back when Hulkamania loomed large and you could buy the good ice cream bars, you know, the ones with sticks, with wrestling's heroes and legends drawn on the cookie part. Yes sir, the golden age of what we knew as WWF was pretty dang wholesome and safe for childhood consumption. Well, usually anyway. Never mind the fact that the events boiled down to physical, hate-filled combat anyway. There were a few times when classic WWF went beyond its usual boundaries. Times when our mothers walked in on our Saturday morning wrestling viewing and gasped in horror at the spectacles on that screen. In hindsight, it's little wonder we all turned out the way we did. I'm Adam Pacitti from Cultaholic.com, and these are the 10 craziest moments from Hulkamania era WWF. Join us. Number 10, I Stab at Thee. Something tells me that if the Berserker were around today, he would be a cult favourite, perhaps ironically. Basically, he was a comedically bumbling version of Bruiser Brody, but Berserker had his charms. A Viking by trade, Berserker put the Huss in hustle, as he wielded a sword and shield on his forays to the ring. The accessories were strictly ornamental, except for that one time he tried to murder the Undertaker in the middle of the ring. A match between the two in April 1992 never even got started, after Berserker attacked Undertaker before the bell and a little melee ensued. In an apparent blind rage, Berserker whacked the dead man with his shield, then whipped him across the back with the sword while Vince McMahon growled in terror. Then, with the world watching, Berserker took that sword with a two-handed grip and tried to stab Undertaker. Fortunately, Undertaker did move away, though the canvas ended up as collateral damage. They tell you don't try this at home, but we were all impressionable youth, so you just know that some kids tried to mimic this. I wonder how many close calls there were. Number 9, That Voodoo That You Do. General reception of the Papa Shango character is mixed, no doubt. He's an unforgettable character from a colourful time in WWF history, but on the other hand, he's unforgettable for some pretty silly reasons. And the angle we're about to discuss was hard to watch in more than one sense. During a match pitting the Ultimate Warrior against Brian Knobbs on WWF Superstars, Shango came to ringside and absconded with one of Warrior's discarded wristbands. Was he going to badger Warrior to sign it at the airport the next morning? No, this was much more sinister. After Warrior vanquished the singular Nasty Boy, Shango returned to ringside in an apparent trance, swaying about as though he'd just been bonked on the head with a giant novelty baseball bat. Apparently, he used the wristband to put a curse on Warrior, which caused a victorious Mr. Hellwig to collapse to the ground, clutching his abdomen. This all sounds really hokey and inane, and it was, but what qualifies it for this list is that Warrior puked all over a doctor and attending officials once backstage. Sucked to be you if you were eating oatmeal that morning. Number 8, Sealed Shut. Hang on, we're not done talking about Ultimate Warrior related trauma just yet. The previous year, Warrior had his hands full with one of the few individuals in WWF capable of matching his inscrutable power, The Undertaker. To overpower Warrior in a wrestling match for a moment was one thing, but to render him helpless to the point of nearly killing him made for a traumatic sight. And Undertaker had the means to terrorize the world's youth by doing just that. Warrior was a guest on Paul Bearer's funeral parlor segment when he was suddenly attacked by a young phenom. After sufficiently beating Warrior down, Undertaker placed him inside of the set design casket and closed the lid, while a sadistic bearer locked it shut. The casket was so small that movement was nearly impossible, and the minutes felt like hours as WWF's crack staff of officials tried to break it open to save Warrior's life. When they finally managed to open the lid, there was Warrior, all but motionless, having futilely clawed at the inside lining before passing out. Some of us who were insomniacs and night owls as adults have WWF to blame, really. Number 7, Python Pancakes. At the same TV taping in which Undertaker unflinchingly attempted to murder Warrior in March 1991, the fans on hand were treated to another disturbing visual, one made more chilling by the acting of one of the victims. While Jake Jake the Snake Roberts had a history of tormenting foes with his trusty python Damien, Earthquake took revenge a wee bit too far. And he made sure Jake could do nothing but watch as he exacted that revenge. After a short match between the two that ended in a non-finish, Roberts was helplessly wedged into the ropes by Earthquake, who went and fetched the bag that Damien was kept in. Despite Roberts' desperate pleas, Earthquake bounded off the ropes and landed his sit-down senton splash onto the bag several times, presumably crushing the animal. By the time Roberts finally got free, he tearfully opened the bag and then recoiled in abject horror when he saw the damage. In truth, the bag Earthquake squash contained no Damien, but rather, as John Tenter later revealed, pantyhose stuffed with raw hamburger meat, but nobody in the audience or at home knew that. Number 6, the full Monty. After those last few barbaric entries, let's shift gears and talk about something not at all violent, but certainly an incident that was hard to justify being on Saturday mornings in syndication. And this is a positive one for Jake Roberts, so this'll help dull the terrible loss of his pet hamburger meat. In 1988, Roberts was in a bitter feud with ravishing Rick Rude, who made all sorts of over-the-line overtures towards Jake's wife Cheryl, including airbrushing her face onto his tights. After a squash match win on an episode of Superstars one week, Rude removed his basic tights to reveal the Cheryl tights underneath. Roberts had attacked him at SummerSlam for the stunt, but this time a mere beating wouldn't suffice. Jake hit the ring, waylaid Rude, and proceeded to rip the tights off of him. A blurring dot placed over Rude's middle area gave the impression that Rude had nothing on underneath, and the wild crowd response enhanced that notion. In actuality, Rude apparently wore some sort of flesh-toned underwear, but if your parents walked in at that point, they saw a naked man getting beaten senseless. Number 5, here comes revenge. The idea was a sound one. The Big Boss Man receives threats from an anonymous ex-convict who claims to have been abused by the former prison guard and is coming to exact revenge on his tormentor. While everything after the reveal of the jumpsuit-wearing Nailz was pretty lame, the reveal itself was incredible. In the midst of the overly cartoon Saturday morning WWF action, one of the most jarring beatdowns of all time took place. The imposing man called Nailz attacked Bossman following a routine squash match, handcuffed him to the ropes, and repeatedly struck his leg with his own nightstick. And we're talking bone-cracking sounds here. The assault continued with Bossman being choked, harshly kicked in the ribs, and left just about motionless while globs of his own spit dribbled to the mat. Attacks with weapons are common in wrestling, but this was altogether disquieting. WWF Magazine compounded the effect by showing photos of Bossman in the aftermath covered in dark bruises all over his body. To a young child, Nailz was a terrifying and chilling figure, and his remorseless attack on the Big Boss Man left all sorts of impressions. Number 4, spurred on. When the Ultimate Warrior stormed the ring at the 1988 SummerSlam to conquer Intercontinental Champion the Honky Tonk Man, he did so as a surprise substitute. Honky's original challenger was longtime rival Brutus the Barber Beefcake, who seemed poised to unseat the Eternal IC champ, but something funny happened on the way to the Garden. Days earlier on WWF Superstars, he was brutally assaulted by veteran heel Outlaw Ron Bass, who brought props. After Bass used his cherished bullwhip, which he named Miss Betsy, to drag Beefcake around the ring, strangling him into a stupor, the Outlaw then produced his trusty spurs. He knelt down over a grounded Beefcake and proceeded to drag the sharpened points across the forehead of the Barber, mutilating the skin and drawing an alarming amount of blood for a family-friendly WWF product. Later airings of the incident, including one during SummerSlam which was shown to explain Beefcake's absence, put a giant red X on the screen to filter out the gruesomeness, but when it first aired, the blood was there for all to see. Number 3, bleed for your country. Yokozuna had only been on WWF television for a few months when he won the 1993 Royal Rumble. Though he more than looked the part of a shadow-casting final boss that pits any hero as an underdog, he needed to do a few evil things on the road to WrestleMania just to hammer that point home. That February, Yoko battled proud American hacksaw Jim Duggan in an unusual challenge match where Duggan was tasked with simply knocking the mammoth Yoko off his feet. He did just that and then paid dearly for it. A prideful Yoko jumped Duggan afterward, laying him out. He then dragged Hacksaw to the corner and dropped not one, not two, but 3 banzai drops on the motionless Patriot. It took a lot to keep Duggan down, but he was stiffer than Jack on a bus when Mr. Fuji placed the American flag over Duggan's body prior to the 500-pound monster landing a 4th leaping sit-down. Blood caked Duggan's mouth as he was stretched out of the arena, eyes shut the entire time. At least when Nailz brutalized Bossman was mostly conscious. Here, Duggan was left bleeding and unresponsive. Number 2, A World of Pain. These last 2 entries are so famous that fans who were born years after they took place have heard of them. And among the reasons why they're so famous is that they took place in a time where these sorts of extreme moments were a bit less commonplace. In the run-up to the 1992 Royal Rumble, the Rockers were firmly at a crossroads, and Marty Jannetty wanted to know where an increasingly detached Shawn Michaels' head was. So they had a summit of sorts on Brutus Beefcake's interview segment, The Barbershop. Michaels, after a few tense moments, feigned like he was going to mend fences with Jannetty and enthusiastically embraced his partner. Then, after a couple of beats, Michaels laid out Jannetty with a form-perfect superkick. And if that act of betrayal weren't enough, Michaels then picked up his dazed partner and launched him through the glass window of the barbershop set, though some scholars maintain that Jannetty tried to dive through the window in an act of cowardice. Jannetty got a little colour to heighten the grim spectacle, punctuated by Michaels' emphatic tearing up of a magazine photo of the duo. Number 1, Bite This. Come on, you knew this was coming. What in the hell else was possibly going to beat that wonderful time in which Jake Roberts, Randy Savage, and a cobra that most certainly wasn't a python occupied the ring one Saturday morning? With every other entry on this list, you could have placed them in the Attitude or Ruthless Aggression eras and you wouldn't have batted your lashes any. But had this happened on Raw in 1999, people would have still gone insane because this was mental. After a squash victory, Roberts goaded mortal enemy Savage, who was on commentary, to fight him in the ring. Savage obliges, gets beaten down, and is tied in the ropes. Out comes the snake bag, which contains a freaking cobra. Roberts brings the cobra over to Savage, which does what it was intended to do, and that is sink its fangs into Savage's arm. The panic from Vince, Roddy Piper, Miss Elizabeth, and a gaggle of officials and doctors as they tried to free the pained Savage to get him to a hospital was more at home in a horror movie or at least a nighttime drama for adults. Props to WWF for creating a memorable angle, but equal condemnation for all the nightmares they've given us over the years.